Welcome to this section. Next thing I'm going to look at is the risk profile. The key to using BS is a risk profile. Now, guidance on the means of escape and the construction is based on a risk profile. And the risk profile is based on things. Based on, first of all, occupant characteristic. What type of occupants are in there? Are they asleep? Are they awake? And the next thing it's based on is the fire growth rate. There's different fire growth rates. Things burn at different rates. That's what's essential to time to get out, is the fire growth rate. Now here's table 2, occupant characteristic. As you can see here, occupant characteristic A is occupants who are awake and familiar with the building, for example, in an office or industrial premises. B is occupants who are awake and unfamiliar with the building, for example, shops, exhibitions, museums, leisure centres, etc. That's a B risk profile. And C is occupants who are likely to be asleep. Now D and E are there ready for when they do eventually bring in hospitals, which is D, and E, which is railway stations and airports. At the moment, you can't use them for D and E, but they're ready there waiting for when they do bring them in. So that's the occupant characteristic. Next one is fire growth rates. Now this table gives you a rough example here. For example, a slow fire growth rate is what you're expecting at a banking hall when it's got limited combustible materials. A medium fire growth rate is what you'd expect with stacked cardboard boxes and wooden pallets. I mean, this is going to be typically the most common risk profile, is a medium fire growth rate. You know, furnishings, wood, pallets, etc. You've also got a fast fire growth rate where you've got baled thermoplastic chips. If you've got them in your office, it's the 3. Stacked plastic products or baled clothing. And ultra fast is any flammable liquids or expanded cellular plastics and foam. So it gives you an indication there's 4 different fire growth rates. You need to get the fire growth rate correct for your building, and everything is based on the occupant characteristic and the fire growth rate. That's where you get your risk profile from. So for example, in an office, A2. Yeah, A, occupants who are awake and familiar, and 2 is a medium fire growth rate. That's it. Now just to give you an example of an ultra fast fire growth rate, do you have a real Christmas tree at Christmas time? A real Christmas? Are you a real person or artificial? Well, I'm going to show you some footage now of a real Christmas tree that's dried out in a central heated house. This tree has not been treated to make it more flammable. People do that, don't they? Have you noticed that? They bump into the tree, all the needles fall off. They think it's drying out. They get hairspray, spray it to make it more flammable. This video footage I'm going to show you now is a real Christmas tree, real time. Watch this. That is how flammable a real Christmas tree is. And the bunny gets it. Now, I'm only joking. No animals were injured in the filming of that footage. That is how flammable a real Christmas tree is. A real Christmas tree is about the worst thing you can put in your house. Now, I love Christmas, and I've always had real trees. You can't beat a real tree, the smell of a real tree. However, did you know that that's how fast they burn? After watching that, and I've got 15 years experience in the fire service, after watching that, I would never have a real Christmas tree again. I went out and bought an artificial one. You can get them on eBay for about 150 quid. There's the clock. That is real time. Real Christmas tree, real time. I showed that video footage on one of my courses. A lady said to me, "That's a real Christmas tree." I said, "Yeah." She says, "My friend has a real Christmas tree every year and she still puts candles on it." She says, "Should I tell her?" Should you tell her? No, I wouldn't. I'd keep it a secret. Should I tell her? You go to a hotel, a manager's walking around. He goes in a protected staircase, the main entrance, protected staircase. He's walking around. There's a cardboard box under the stairs. What does he say? "Right, get it out. Flammable, get it out." Next thing you know, bring in the Christmas tree. Have you noticed that? They're bringing a 15-foot Christmas tree into a main protected stairway. I'll tell you now, I'll be checking, is that a real one? That is a real Christmas tree. That is an ultra-fast fire growth rate. That is a 4. What sort of travel distance do you think you need in there? Now, this code will not allow that risk profile. BS will not allow a 4 risk profile. What it's saying is, if it is a 4, you must put in some fixed suppression to reduce that fire growth rate. You can't have an A4, B4, C4 risk profile. And I think that's reasonable, because based on the risk, you don't need that. You need some fixed suppression. That's another good thing about the code. Now, these risk profiles, what if you're designing a typical bar, a typical office, a typical shop, typical bingo hall? Well, the code does give you examples of typical risk profiles. There's about 64 in the code. Here it is, table 5. So, for example, in here you've got an art gallery, which might be a B1 or a B2. You've got a banking hall, B1. Office is A2, a bingo hall is B2. So if your client asks you, I want you to design me a typical bingo hall, you can go to this table here and you are going to get a B2, because it's a typical risk profile. It's a typical bingo hall. Now if your client says, I want you to do a bingo hall with all these furnishings in there that are flammable, well, it's not a typical bingo hall, is it? Do you understand me? So you can use the typical risk profiles if that's what the client's asking for, and all you do is you specify that in the fire safety manual. This has been designed as a B2, a typical bingo hall, so that if you start putting in loads of flams in there, it's gone against the risk profile, hasn't it? Now, can you do a speculative design? In other words, if a client says to you, I want to design a storage building, can you design it on a different risk profile? The reason I'm asking this, I went to do a seminar, and what happened was these approved inspectors were designing a client who was going to store bricks in a storage, but bricks, and he said on his base double line, can you do me an A2 risk profile, medium fire growth rate for bricks, in other words, bricks and a bit of pallets. And it went to the fire brigade, said to them, no, we're not accepting an A2 risk profile. If it's storage, it has to be A4, it has to be. And the client, they said to me, is that right? I said, well, no, I disagree with that. If your client's storing bricks, why can't you design him a storage building to store bricks? That's what he wants. No, you've got to do it on A4 so you can store Christmas trees. He's not storing Christmas trees. He wants to store bricks in there. So I said, yeah, but what happens if he's storing bricks and the next day he comes in there and starts storing Christmas trees? Well, you could say that about anything that's designed afterwards, couldn't you? I can understand the fire brigade concern. What their concern was that you design it as an A2, allow long travel distances, then he was going to change what in. Now, if that's the case, what can the fire brigade do? Well, I'll tell you what they can do. They can put it under an alterations notice procedure. If they have got concerns that they may change what's going to go in there, under the regulatory form fire safety, or they can say, right, this building's going under an alterations notice procedure. If you are going to store anything other than those bricks in there, we want to know about it. We're going to come in, and if they walk in there now and they're storing Christmas trees or anything else flammable, they can say, right, then we're going to close you down. Do you understand? That's the way to do it. Use the alterations notice procedure, because if not, all the client has to do is, okay, I won't use base double line, I'll use approved document B, and I'll go down, I'll use a normal hazard storage building. Do you see what I mean? You can find other ways of doing it. That's not the intention of the code. The risk profile for a storage building for bricks, maximum A2, that's what you can do. Now, the examples in this code are only basically indicative, and risk profiles for specific premises should actually be determined for the client. Really, what you should be doing is saying, what's it going to be? The general public, B. What's the fire growth rate? It's going to be fast, B3. That's the idea of the code. However, if it's going to be a typical office, a typical shop, you can use this table. You can use them. Now, what about liaison with the fire brigade? Should you liaise with the fire brigade? Well, you should. And the big reason is, if you design a building to base double line, it will allow you longer travel distances than at present with approved document B. And there may be some implications with the fire brigade. Again, I did a seminar, and the building controller said to me, the consultation process, which is a legal process they're supposed to do with the fire brigade told the building controller, this particular one, they told them that they don't want to get involved with the consultation process. They said, we don't need to. All we'll do, when the building's occupied, we want to see the fire risk assessment. In other words, pass the plans, we'll have a look at the risk assessment, and then we'll be happy. Yeah, but I see a big problem with that. What happens if a building controller passes plans to base double line for an office that's got everything in there, sprinklers, everything, and he manages to get an 80-metre travel distance? Okay? Gets an 8-metre travel distance based on the code. Fire brigade come in, where's your stairs? He says, it's down there, mate, 80 metres away. 80-metre travel distance? No way, I'm shutting you down. I'm issuing a prohibition notice, which they can do because there's no statutory bar now. Fire brigade could issue prohibition notice and shut them down because it's unsafe. However, it's a brand new building. It's been passed. Go to court. Who do you think would win that claim? Do you think the fire officer would win by saying he don't like 80 metres? Or do you think the building controller with his client's going to win based on base double line? Well, my opinion is the building controller will. This has been designed to base double line, a fire engineering principled code. It fully complies with base double line. If it fully complies, don't forget my statement, you have demonstrated that those people can get out before condition becomes untenable. All I'm trying to say is you don't want that issue. You don't want the issue where the fire brigade disagree with the code. Get them on board, especially if you're going to extend travel distances quite significantly using this code. Now, you've also got to be careful because access for firefighting. There's a 60 metre rule on access for firefighting. What happens if you're down a building with sprinklers and you get an 80 metre travel distance and it's got a firefighting staircase and you can't meet the 60 metres? You understand you've got a problem now? Because the fire brigade are going to insist on access for firefighting the 60 metres. You're designing an 80 metre travel distance, you might have to put another staircase in. Well, if you're going to have to put another staircase in, you're not going to put sprinklers in that building to extend travel distances if you still have to put another staircase in anyway to meet the fire requirements. Do you understand? The fire service. What are you going to do about this? Well, that's where good liaison with the fire brigade. In other words, you say to the fire brigade, I'm designing an office building. I want to extend my travel distances to reduce the staircase. I can get 80 metres using sprinklers, smoke detection, etc. However, we can't meet your 60 metres. Can we extend it to 80 metres if we put sprinklers in and not meet your 60 metres? Or would you prefer us not to put sprinklers in and give you 60 metres? In other words, at least nothing else, give the fire brigade a choice. Because I think I know what they'd say. I think most fire officers would rather see sprinklers in there and have an extended travel distance than not see sprinklers and have the 60 metres. I don't know, but that's my opinion. In other words, consult with the fire brigade. Consult. What happens if you've got mixed risk profiles? What happens if you've got different risk profiles in the same compartment, for example? Let's have an example. What if you've got an office, which is a typical office, an A2 risk profile, and the guy in the office likes chips? Okay, he likes chips. He's got a deep fat fryer in the corner. Well, the deep fat fryer, you could argue, is an A4 risk profile. Okay, so you've got an A2 with an A4. What risk profile would you apply to this occupancy? What would you apply? What do you think is reasonable? I asked that on one of my seminars. One guy said A3. A3? What are you getting A3 for? Bit of both, bit of both. A2, A4, bit of both. Look, mate, you'll never get an A3 ever. Either that'll catch fire, it's an A4, or it won't catch fire, it's an A2. It's an A2 or an A4. At the moment, that is an A4. Worst case scenario. Now, you're not allowed an A4. The code won't allow that. So what do you have to do? Well, you have to put some fixed suppression in. So he says, all right, I want my chips. I'm going to put in an Ansell fixed installation in that chip, in that deep fat fryer. If it catches fire, it'll put it out to the appropriate British standard. Now what can you apply to that compartment? Well, if you put it in, now really you could argue it's an A2 now, because it's going to put it out. But the code doesn't say that. The code says if you put some fixed suppression in, it will allow you to reduce it by a factor of 1. And this becomes an A3. Like I say, I personally feel it should be an A2. But the way the code's implied, it's an A3. You've reduced it by a factor of 1 and you can have those chips. Someone said, well, can I put an extinguisher there and get an A3? No. Because you're relying on someone intervening, aren't you? However, if it's a fixed installation to the appropriate British standard, that would become an A3 risk profile. What about future changes? What happens if you design a building to base double line and the client decides to change that building, say from an office to a shop? Well, you're going to have problems now, aren't you? This is why you do have to take into account future changes. In other words, at least make clear to your client that if that building, if they said to you, I want to design an office, and you manage to get an 85 metre travel distance in an office with sprinklers, everything else in there, and you manage to get a mass, the lower the risk profile and the further you go, the bigger the restrictions are later. Now, that doesn't mean, someone says to me, well, why didn't you work on a worst risk case then? Well, the client don't want you to stick 4 staircases in just in case you turn it into a shop, but at least be aware of it. Now, if the client says to you, I might want to change that into a shop in the future, you might take that into account in the design. In other words, work it out with a shop with sprinklers in, what's the most you can get. Then don't put sprinklers in and what have you, and say, I get an office unsprinkled, but if you put sprinklers in, you can turn it into a shop. Do you see what I mean? You've got to consider future changes. But you're not going to design a building and spend millions of pounds on it just in case they do change it, but make sure your client is aware of any future restrictions if there's going to be likely changes. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is density factors, floor space factors. And what it is, if you're designing a building, you need to work out occupancy numbers. You generally use floor space factors, or if the occupancy is known, like in a cinema, you just work out how many seats there are. But this code has got about 60 different floor space factors. Like a bowling alley is 10 square metres, a bingo hall 0.5. Now in here, an office closed plan is 8 square metres per person, an office open plan is 5 square metres per person. What is ADB? Well, ADB is 6. In other words, there's a bit of a difference in the floor space factors. Which one do you use? Do you have to use these? Can you use anyone? Do you understand it? It depends. Now, do you have to use these floor space factors if you use base double line? No. These are only indicative. You do not have to apply these. However, this just gives you more guidance on floor space factors which are suitable for typical offices, typical shops, bingo halls, etc. You don't have to use this. For example, here, shop, 2 square metres. If you apply that to Tesco's, how many toilets would you have? I'm not even funny. If you went to Tesco's now and everyone's there not moving around because the trolleys are all jammed, would you go in? It's not a reasonable factor. A supermarket might use 6 or 8 square metres. Sometimes the client will tell you, Marks and Spencer's will tell you, we're using a floor space factor of 8 or 10. In other words, the client may tell you that, but you can't just make the floor space factors up. So these are good floor space factors. ADB is different, but any floor space factor you have to demonstrate to the building control or the approved inspector that these are valid floor space factors. That completes this section of this element.